Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Finlay. I'm the President and CEO here at the Stimson Center. I'm delighted to welcome you to this live event with the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, whom we will hear from in just a minute. We will be collecting questions from our online audience, and so I hope you will avail yourself of the Q&A function on your screens, and we look forward to hearing what is on your mind. As you are aware, the IAEA is responsible for ensuring the safe, secure, and peaceful use of nuclear technologies. It's a colossal mission, ranging from preventing the spread of nuclear weapons to enabling access to innovative and potentially life-saving medical technologies for the treatment of cancers. It is also, of course, an often thankless job, made even tougher by the challenges of the global pandemic. We are joined today by the man in charge of it all. Rafael Grossi is a veteran diplomat with more than 3 decades of experience. His resume is long. He is a veteran of Argentina's foreign ministry. He has served as president of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, president designate of the 2020 NPT Review Conference, and I could go on at some length, but suffice to say there are few individuals that have qualifications sufficient to manage the complicated mission that Director General Grossi successfully manages. Director General Grossi, welcome to Washington and welcome to the Stimson Center.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here. Great to be at Stimson. My first time here, although of course I'm very familiar with your work. So it's a double pleasure. And ready to discuss with you and to talk to you and those connecting out there about job.
Well, excellent. I have a lot of questions for you, as you might imagine, and we have a short period of time. So I'd like to suggest the following order of battle. I'd like to maybe press you on a few current events.
Yes.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Iran, about North Korea. I'm sure questions that you've never, you seldom get asked in your line of work.
Right.
Second, I thought we might just turn and talk a little bit about the role of the agency in the field of emerging technologies. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, as I mentioned, I hope that our colleagues in the audience will send some questions in and we'll hear what's on their mind. But maybe before we get to those weighty issues, sir, I'm curious about your trip here here to Washington. This is not the your first trip to Washington as Director General. You slipped in just before the pandemic set in.
Yes.
And thus far, I know you've had meetings with Secretary Blinken, with Jake Sullivan at the White House. How'd the meetings go?
Well, the meetings were important and necessary because my trip here comes at a time where on some of the issues we'll be discussing, including Iran, or maybe starting with Iran, we are at a difficult juncture, and so it's important for me to explain to the government here what we're doing, what are the challenges that we are having, and of course to listen from them. What are the expectations? How do they see the situation? When you mentioned those whom I met with, I would add to that list, and I think it's important in terms of the interactions, the Hill. I was there because there is an intense interest in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and also in the House about the process, the ongoing process, where it can lead to. So it was an indispensable stop at this phase of my negotiations. Yes.
And so thank you for that. So let's get into it and get a couple of issues out of the way kind of at the top. I want to start with Iran.
Yes.
Which I suspect has occupied a little bit of your time, as you say, on this visit, not just with the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, but certainly on the Hill as well, where there is, of course, acute interest. You were in Tehran just last month, yes. I believe. We have failed thus far to restart negotiations over return to the JCPOA. And now, of course, we are hearing calls to censure Iran at the forthcoming Board of Governors meeting next month. So a two-part question. Where are we with the JCPOA? Mm-hmm. And second, is censure a good idea?
Well, let's go one by one. I think when we look at the negotiation, the consultations, the process with Iran, every day matters. And so when we look at the perspective, and you're rightly putting like a reference in the meeting of the Board of Governors that will have to take place towards the end of November, then in my mental structure, that is like 23rd century. So just because there's so much going on and so much that will influence at the end of the day what may or may not happen then. What I'm trying to concentrate now is on the most immediate challenges that we have in terms of my interactions with Iran. And then at the same time, as we go along and as we do these things, the overall situation gets influenced by that. So the negotiation with Iran is not one where you can say, well, this is my main, midterm objective, and then this is, it changes all the time. It's very challenging because of this, but at the same time, it's the only way to tackle it. There's also the added, I wouldn't say complication, it's like that. There are many actors, and perhaps I shouldn't even consider myself a main actor, since when it comes to JCPOA, I'm not a party to the negotiation, but I am essential. I'm the IAEA. The IAEA is an essential element as guarantor, as verifier of all of that. And we are in constant deliberation with the negotiators as to whether what they are doing is in line with what we might be needed to be verifying, and so on and so forth. So it's an immensely dense, I would say, process filled with consultations in all senses. So in that regard, it cannot be preordained, predicted, although we have an obligation to try to imagine and have a vision. And this I have.
Center, good idea?
Yeah,
it is. Secretary Blinken has called recently for the exercise of what he has said are other options in the event that Iran does not change course. Did he tell you what that meant?
No, if you mean what plan B, C, or D means. First of all, these plans B, C, D, or whatever is a national thing or a multinational thing, if it's in alliance or alone or whatever. And I don't have an opinion. I don't have an opinion on that. All I can say is that what we must do is to ensure, first of all, we have an ongoing mission there. Let's never forget that. It's not that. It is not Korea, where I want to, where I eventually will return. Today, as we speak, I have inspectors doing their job on a number of facilities in Iran. So that is one thing. I have to take care of that and continue reporting. And this process, of course, again, influences the other things. And then we have to think about what may happen with the JCPOA. And here, I would say, what is important is how we, from the verification, inspection side, are contributing to that process. And you look at the last few months, you may have seen what we have been doing, not as a service to a negotiation in particular, but also because of that. Let's go back a little bit in time and think about what happened last December. Last December, for me, for all intents and purposes, was the beginning of a new government or a new phase in Iran. Not in August this year, when President Raisi took over. It was last December, because last December, there was a change in the rules of the game as much as the IAEA work is concerned. What happened was that the Majlis passed a law, or a law was passed their parliament, where a number of very ambitious goals and very specific objectives were set for the Iranian nuclear program. That was one part, which is often forgotten, because the parliament was telling the executive what they need to do with their nuclear program, with an amazing degree of specificity, I would say. Uranium metal, enrichment, this and that. All right, so first thing. Second thing, they said, well, the additional transparency measures that came together with the JCPOA are hereby terminated. Right, not hereby, I mean, will be terminated with a date that will explain what happened next. And this was a big loss for us, because for us and for the international community, I would say transparency, because what actually meant was that, first of all, the additional protocol, which was being applied provisionally. I suppose people are familiar with the additional protocol, which is an instrument that allows our inspectors to see a bit more than the normal safeguards agreements that exist. So they said, okay, that is over. And a number of additional so-called transparency measures that existed and that allowed us to do a number of things would also be discontinued. They said, and this is going to kick in February, next February. So there were a number of exchanges. We were notified that this was going to happen. Some other players were interacting to see what could be done, but the clock was ticking. And February 23rd, I think it was approaching fast. So I decided to go. Nobody told me to do so, and I didn't have a mandate to do that, other than my general mandate of, being a protector of proliferation. So I went there and I sat down with them and I told them, listen, you have this law, but at the same time, I continue to believe that you want to go back to this agreement at some point in time. Well, my opinion is that if you want to do that, with the current limitations that you're putting on us, it might be considerably difficult for your partners in this agreement to do it, simply because they will have a big black hole in terms of information on things that may be happening here. So we were able to agree on a number of temporary activities in terms of monitoring and verification that we would be able to continue doing. Not in spite of, but coexisting with the new law, with the new rules of the game. So we did just that, which I think was important in that it continued to add information and transparency to what would have been, if not a total blackout, very close to, very close to. So we managed that, but ever since the elections took place and the transition became a reality, this process became more and more complicated, up to a point where it was quite obvious that even these activities would themselves be stopped. So I went again in September, and we got yet another agreement to be able to continue doing that, with some issues around that, because we were not able, although we agreed that we would be doing all of this, we were not able to do that for one facility, and we may discuss about that later. The essence of what I mean to say that now, and this is the initial intention that in this long reply I'm giving you is that we have been keeping the patient stable as much as we can in terms of the amount and quality of information that we can put on the table as a baseline, which is indispensable for any further negotiation.
All right, let's move to simpler subjects. North Korea. Yeah, obviously, this has also been an equal challenge to the regime, and I'm sure a source of sleepless nights for you and your predecessors as well. You said last month that DPRK's program is moving, quote, full steam ahead.
Yes.
So I want to ask a two-part question. One, with the high-stakes summit diplomacy of the past few years now seemingly behind us, I'm curious to see, to hear from you, is what do you see as next steps vis-a-vis Pyongyang?
Well, yeah, indeed. The DPRK, of course, is a different case. It's a different situation. It's a situation where, as you know, our inspectors have been barred from being there back in 2009, and ever since we haven't had a presence on the ground. However, we have continued informing and reporting. And one thing I decided is that we would make a deliberate effort to try and make sure that our reports would be as clear, complete, and elaborate as they could possibly be. This because I sensed at some point when I came to the job that there were starting to be voices indicating that in as much as the nuclear side, because there's a missile and the other things that you are also working on here at Stimson, that the nuclear chapter was mechanistic and perhaps it was an issue, voices at the Board of Governors, I would say, not voices out in the street, saying that perhaps this is an issue that should be put, in the freezer and no longer considered by the board. And I saw that as an alarm bell that indicated that perhaps the agency could be more explicit in some of the things that are happening. And so we sharpened our lenses, and we've been trying to be more complete and comprehensive in what we inform. And when I said what I said, you were quoting me on these things, is simply because they are working on every possible imaginable area that they have at their disposal. The reactors have been restarted, plutonium separation is ongoing, uranium enrichment is probably really ongoing again, and other facilities in country are giving signs of being active. So this is what I say when this is what I mean when I say full steam ahead. Same time, I must say, Secretary Blinken reassured me to the effect that the administration is still trying, is still making overtures to try to revive some form of consultation with Pyongyang.
So you referenced, sir, our work here at Stimson on 38 North, and my colleague Jenny Town, who directs that program, has long, a slightly more technical question, has long asserted that despite the fact that I think sort of more generally, it's been argued that the Yongbyon complex is kind of old and outdated. It's her contention, I think, that it remains central to North Korea's nuclear program. And I wonder if you could comment on that and whether or not you have on the importance of that particular facility, and also if you have a sense as to how much enrichment capacity North Korea has beyond the Yongbyon complex.
Well, I could not get into too much detail, and perhaps I should not, because I beg you to bear with me on one thing. Whereas we are giving as much information as we can based on the technical means available to us. When it comes to capacities, as an inspector, I don't like to speculate. I think it's legitimate and positive that others do, including think tanks and analysts, but as an inspector, I shouldn't speculate when it comes to grams and kilograms. What we see is a lot of activity. And what is relevant is to see that compared with 2009, this program has spawned in activity-wise, geographically-wise, into the country. So it's no longer this compound and what is there. It's much more than that. So for us is a preoccupation, and it's a big challenge because I'm persuaded we will go back. And the day that happens, which could happen quite suddenly, we need to be prepared, because the effort, the verification, safeguards effort that we will be confronted with will be huge.
You've made a little news on this trip already. You may not know it already, but I want to talk to you about the new trilateral agreement between the United States, UK, and Australia. So the Biden administration, as you're aware, came to town really pledging to revitalize American alliances that sort of help shape a broadening competition with China. And so the recent agreement between Washington, the UK, and Australia to share nuclear-powered submarine technology is certainly part of the president's kind of opening salvo in that broader strategy I think the administration has. Your mission is to verify compliance with the NPT, and yesterday you said that it, quote, cannot be excluded that other countries would use AUKUS as precedent to pursue their own nuclear submarine plans. So what action do you expect, Mr. Director General, the partners to take to ensure that whatever arrangement they ultimately conclude is consistent and does not undermine the non-proliferation regime? And just how uncomfortable was this conversation when you had it with Secretary Blinken?
Well, it's never uncomfortable. Secretary Blinken is an incredibly gracious man, an expert and a diplomatic colleague. So for cooperative interest, I must say that we diplomats are very nice always. So no, I would say, but it was a very deep conversation about this, and a very serious one. First of all, one must understand that this process is going to be complex. We should not fool ourselves about this. This is not a straightforward thing where we are informed about this and we have to arrange some safeguards approach to it, and it will be done. It will be very complex. It is the first of a kind after some precedents that you are familiar with back in the 1980s, and when other countries had similar ideas, but they never led to a real process of consultation and negotiation of a verification approach and inspection activity. Here we will have, and I've said that as well, there are two equally important levels. There is a level, there's a normative level, and there is an operational level. The normative level, I think it's of great importance for all of us. And this is something I reiterated to Secretary Blinken and to others, and to the partners in AUKUS when they notified me just a few hours before the public announcement was made. They were gracious enough to come and tell me about this. And what I told them then is what I told the Board of Governors a few hours later, when I said, for me, I don't have opinions on your military programs or your geostrategic approaches, but I have one beacon that guides me. It's non-proliferation. And when we look at that, you have obligations. They are different because two of you are nuclear weapon states and one is not. And you have different legal norms that link you with us. So we have to tackle a very meticulous effort of reconciling the commitments we have in terms of non-proliferation with the activities that they are going to have. And mind you, we are not absolutely clear on the kind of technical model that is going to be done for AUKUS. As you know, they have, I suppose for this reason, they have announced a period of 18 months through which they are going to be exploring these things. But I've told them that I'm not expecting to wait for 18 months until we engage formally. And I must say that Secretary Blinken gave me reassuring indications that this is not the case or the intention, and that we are going to be working on this soon. On my part, I already started, and we have a group of experts, some of my best safeguards inspectors and some of my best legal experts already working on this, so that when they come, we will have a number of questions and a number of requests.
Your predecessors, sir, consistently pointed out to me, and I think to others as well, no doubt, that while the agency gets its global attention for being a watchdog, right, in many ways for the staff of the IAEA, the mission that really speaks to them most is the other half, right? It's the innovation and peaceful uses mission. So I want to turn to that a little bit, if I may.
Yeah.
I know just a little over a week, COP26 will convene, as you know, in Glasgow, and I think it's safe to say that the stakes really could not be higher for humanity. There is a debate, I think, about the extent to which new and advanced nuclear reactors will be an important part of the global effort to confront climate change, if they are to play a major role. More reactors will, of course, demand more time of the IAEA. And it comes, of course, at a time when the budget of the IAEA has been flatlined for quite some time. So how can the agency possibly cope in that environment?
Well, certainly there will have to be at some point, and I have said this in Vienna and in capitals as well, at some point there will have to be a reassessment of the needs and what is expected from us in terms of our activity. In your question, there are a number of assumptions on which I agree. I must say, it is quite clear that the global agenda has, as it should be, has evolved. 2021 is not even 2019. Let me tell you an anecdote. When I came to office was December 2019, just a few days before COP25, previous COP. And I remember telling my colleagues that I wanted to go to Madrid. And the first thing they said, well, no, Director General, you shouldn't go there. You're not welcome there. That's not a place for nuclear guys. And I said, well, I tend to disagree with that, so I'll go. And I went, and the debate was not the debate we are having now. But I remember a person, very important person, telling me, instead of why are you here, the question was, where were you guys? So I believe that that indication of a trend now in 2021, at the end of the year, has become not a trend. It has become a necessity. It has become a need which is imposed on those who at least have an honest, intellectually honest look at the problem we have, which is global warming. So we will be present in Glasgow discussing these things, and later on, when the nuclear activity acquires the dimension it is acquiring now, because already now there is growth. We will have to sit down with member states and see what kind of service they want from us, and if we are given the means to do that. But my approach to this, and if I may, connecting a little bit with the other things that you were saying, the peaceful uses, etc., is that one should never stop, and that one should not simply sit down complacently and say, well, you want us to do this, then you have to write, open your checkbook and start putting the figures that we need. Because if I wait for that day to happen, it may never come, and I have the needs that I have. And when we look at the work we need to do with nuclear medicine and cancer, for example, I'm preparing a big initiative for next year, which is going to be called Rays of Hope, where we are planning to start equipping countries that do not have a single radiotherapy unit, which is an obscenity. When you have women that die like flies from cervical cancer, which doesn't kill anybody in Western Europe or in the United States, then I say to myself, I'm not a commentator, I'm not an analyst, I can do something about this. But to do this, do I have the means? No. Today, I was with for the first time in history, I was meeting the president of the World Bank. And again, for the first time in history, the Director General of the IAEA was seeing the president of the Inter-American Development Bank. And I've signed an agreement with the Islamic Development Bank. And I'm going to be doing this all over the world because, again, we have to think differently. The resources are out there. It's not that they are not there. It's that simply they have to start to recognize that the IAEA is a far more efficient vehicle for so many of these missions that they can ever imagine. Next week, I hope to spend the weekend in Vienna. I have a soccer match to coach for my son. But when I finish that mission, I will be out there again, and I'm heading to Brussels. The EU is one of our biggest supporters, like the United States or Canada, where you come from. But the EU looks at us with one eye. And they give us a lot of support to things we care and we continue to care because, you know, I'm proud to be called the nuclear watchdog. I don't dislike that. I tend to like that. Security, safety, safeguards. But cancer, COVID-19, where we have a zoonotic disease integrated action plan working together with the WHO, with FAO, with the World Animal Health Organization, food security, all of these things. So I think the onus is also on us to work creatively, like you guys do. You go and you look for your resources and you have different sources to do your job. And this is what I try to do. That being said, member states, I will be coming to you as well. But I think it's a different kind of world. So it must be a different kind of IAEA as well.
Well put. Will you be a COP? You going to Glasgow?
Oh yeah, I will. I will. Yes, of course.
Well, the weather in Madrid in the spring is much better than the weather in Glasgow in the fall.
So I heard.
Sir, my colleague Nick Roth, the handsome man in the front row, devotes a lot of his time thinking about the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. I want to talk to you about that just for a minute. As you know, we have an upcoming review conference. Nick has argued to me at many times in the past that we really are at an inflection point for the future of the global nuclear security architecture.
Yes.
What does a successful review conference look like to you?
Well, the whole the success of the review conference is assured. But I think we have to look beyond that. Why I say it's assured, we have a process that is well supported. We have excellent co-presidents with Nigeria and Switzerland. We have an agenda that has been agreed. We have an amendment that has been entered into force. So all these elements, thanks to the efforts of so many people here in the United States, the nuclear security summits, the community writ large, working hard for nuclear security. I think we have done lots of good things. What we need to see now is what's next. And what's next is, of course, ensuring the universality of the amended CPPNM. But beyond that, making sure that we look at the whole spectrum of problems we have. Traditionally, and perhaps rightly so, the emphasis has been put on material, physical protection. Nowadays, we know that cyber nuclear security is, if not more important, at least as important as protecting the goods having the guns and the barbed wire around facilities. And here, I think there's a lot of work to be done. We are helping our member states. We are training them as much as we can. I've been discussing today at NNSA, at the Department of Energy, about more activities that we could do together to make sure that when all these facilities, and you can see how circular this whole thing, this whole discussion is, because we're talking about more nuclear, we're talking about, and we haven't talked about SMRs and stuff, but we know that we are going to be having different technological platforms to look after. And so the nuclear security is and will continue to be a challenge, although it will be a rather different one that it has been heretofore.
So let's talk a little bit about innovation. Finland is the first country in the world to build a deep geological repository at long last. Sweden and France, I think, are next. No?
Sweden.
Sweden. Of course, this new type of facility offers benefit, but it also offers some challenges to you and your mission, in that the traditional way of doing business has to change. Business of safeguards, obviously, it makes physical inspection quite impossible. How is the agency approaching safeguards?
We're working there. I was there. I visited Onkalo. I was down there. Fascinating. I call that a game changer. Not because we didn't know before that this could be done. The technology was there, the plans were there, but as you know, as often in life, things change when one sees that it is there. It is there. You can go visit, you can see it, and it's about to be licensed. And our safeguards inspectors are working very closely with the Finnish authorities, with the national regulators, TUK, and others, finding solutions to the safeguards approach. So far, we are making excellent progress, which is going to be trendsetter, so that this is why we're putting so much effort in this one, because we know that when the other repositories come in line, we will have the jurisprudence, if you want, well set. And I was very glad to be there and see that we are making progress. There are no insurmountable problems in terms of safeguarding this spent fuel.
So as technologies mature, there's obviously a gap between the technological solution that may be proffered to these challenges and kind of adoption essentially by member states. Another of my colleagues here at Stimson, Cindy Vestergaard, built with STUK a prototype with the Finnish regulators, as I say, with STUK, a prototype safeguards information management system on the blockchain. It's one possible solution. But as we have learned, I think in that initiative, that gap that is created in uptake between innovation of the technology and adoption, as I say, by member states, creates a gap where bad things can happen. And so tell me, how is the agency facilitating uptake among member states for these more innovative solutions that kind of break the mold on how you have traditionally done business?
Well, I would say in general, the general audiences ignore that. I think day in, day out, there's always activity in-house. We have innumerable technical working groups working on these things, and technical documents being prepared on this. The level of analysis that is ongoing and that we have is very high. I don't see, you refer to a gap there. I don't see a gap. What I see is, of course, the need to adjust to an ongoing process. But nothing is being overlooked, I can tell you that.
Let me turn to another issue, if I may. I want to get personal just for a minute. Sir, you have been a strong and vocal proponent of gender equality in the nuclear field. And as I say, if I can get personal for a moment, you have 7 daughters and a son whose soccer game you're going to coach on the weekend. And I've really admired you for stating the following, quote, "Gender equality and empowerment of women lie at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are vital to fully realizing the rights and potential of everyone." How do you operationalize these values at the agency?
Well, indeed, it's an issue that I feel very passionately about, and I believe that here what one sees sometimes, I wouldn't say all the time, but what I see very frequently when it comes to the gender discussion is that, if I maybe get a bit colloquial here, is that we see a lot of blah blah, and that irritates me a lot. And I feel that one has to demonstrate with actions what one means. What are we doing at the IAEA? First of all, there is the issue of, which is perhaps the most obvious, not necessarily easy, but the most obvious, is the issue of our staff. What is our workforce? How is our workforce composed? And when I came to the IAEA, I had more or less 28% of women in the workforce. So one of my first commitments, I would say, was to put it to 50-50 by 2025, which by many was a crazy proposition. Now, not 2 years into the job, I'm at 36% and counting. It's not an easy thing. There is a lot of pushback. And at the IAEA, we have two combined challenges. You have the challenge of the diversity of the workforce and the gender problems. And on top of this, you have the challenge of STEM and women in STEM. And the numbers of women in STEM are incredibly low. So if the workforce and the work structures around nuclear and in nuclear are inherently low, you cannot pretend that you're going to have a workforce institutionally which is going to be easily at pair. So you have to do something at that level as well. And so, of course, we cannot change things in countries, but we can show some ways to do it. And we've started. I instituted a fellowship, which is not very originally, I must admit, called the Marie Sklodowska Curie Fellowship Program, which has trained already 100. So my baseline was 100 per year, which is for a fellowship like this quite, people talk about 10, 15. I said at least 100. We already have 100. 110 for this year, and I'm talking very intensively with countries. There are countries that profess to have feminist foreign policies. Well, I'm telling them, well, show me that you have a feminist foreign policy by helping me recruit fellows on nuclear. And the interesting thing about this fellowship, which is working very, very well, we have, for example, last year we had 100 women from 72 countries. Is that we can scale it up quite fast. We are extremely flexible. Countries can help in the way they want. There are some that, because of their economic systems, prefer to contribute in kind or offer places at their universities for women. So we also see that we have, and which is what I want, we have women from the STEM area, nuclear engineers, nuclear physicists, nuclear operators. At the moment, for the first time also in history, the entire safety security operation in the IAEA is in the hands of women. I have a deputy director general who is a great French expert on nuclear safety, who is the deputy, and the head of the nuclear security area is another woman. So, and they are there because of their professional qualities, not because they are women. But I think it is an indication that when you do the necessary outreach, when you go the extra mile, then you can start moving things. It's going to be difficult. The STEM issue is a big problem, I think, in general, and I hope countries are acting on it in the way they should be. But what we want to show is that this is a fascinating field for young, talented women, and we are showing them that there is a future. For example, now I've started partnering with some private firms which are looking at this fellowship with interest, because they feel and they see that they could offer job opportunities for these IAEA fellows. So these are just a couple of examples of how we can do better in this area.
Well said, and I'm such an admirer of what you've accomplished in such a short period of time. So I want to turn to some audience questions, and it may surprise you that Iran remains on. We have not satiated. We have not satiated the demand. So our colleague Laura Rosen writes in, from the agency's perspective, did the IAEA have better access to monitor the Iranian program when the U.S. was in the JCPOA than after it quit the deal?
The IAEA had much better access to the Iranian nuclear program when the JCPOA was in force.
Full stop. Let me continue with her question. Do you think that the IAEA access would improve if the US and Iran could reach an agreement on returning to full implementation of the JCPOA? I take it the answer to that.
It takes more than two to that tango. It's Iran and it's the United States, and there are other players. So I hope they can see eye to eye, and there are nuances. Of course, it's a bit of a boutade what I said about the United States and Iran. It is clear that there is a big thing between them in terms of sanctions. There are sanctions coming from other countries as well in the JCPOA. And the persuasions are slightly different. But yes, of course, there is a need for these two players to come closer.
A question from our colleague Theo Calionzes from the MacArthur Foundation. Also, he is I should mention, a veteran of the CTBTO. And I suspect enjoyed the beer in Vienna more than anything else.
Yes, he's good.
Yeah, good for you indeed. Director General Grossi, how do you foresee the future of nuclear energy as a climate solution? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's part of the solution. It's not the magic one that is going to change the whole thing, but it is obvious for anybody to see that without it, we'll never get it, and that without it, the problem, which is already intractable, would become impossible.
Question from my colleague here, Rick Cupid in the room. Another challenge, of course, and change comes from advancements in reactor design, and you alluded to this in your previous answer. Many people see the deployment of new and advanced nuclear reactors as an important part of climate change, of course. My colleague Rick is concerned that this will increase demand on IAEA for safeguards and security work. Again, we talked a little bit about that. Under those funding constraints, can you talk a little bit more about how the IAEA copes with the significant increase in reactor designs in the decade ahead?
Well, first of all, there are more than 72, 73 designs at the moment, and we've cataloged them. We have put them together in a glossy book for everybody to see and judge. The reality is that perhaps saying a handful would be too much, but maybe around 10 or a bit less of those designs will come to fruition, if I may put it like that. And our experts are already looking at those. I wouldn't go into more details because of the commercial implication of what I could say on this, but we are looking and also exchanging with the developers and designers so as to look into the best possible combination of safeguarding capacity that we can deploy.
Back to North Korea.
Yes,
we can go back to North Korea. Question from VOA News. What concerns you most when it comes to North Korea's current nuclear activities? An interesting question. What is your advice to the North Korean government?
Let us in. Let us in.
What's your biggest concern right now?
My biggest concern is the lack of, and this I say as a concerned citizen of the world, not as the Director General of the IAEA. My biggest concern is that there is no diplomatic process ongoing. There must be There must be something that is there so that there is peace in the Korean Peninsula, there is less tension there, and we can move to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Question from our colleague Barbara Sullivan. Do you have confidence that Iran is not enriching uranium covertly?
I don't have any information that they are doing so. Without that indication that they are doing so, I am confident that I'm looking at all the places where they are enriching.
And tell me your level of confidence in terms of your insight into Iran.
It's very high. I want to be very precise and see if I understood you correctly. I have very high confidence in the ability of my inspection system to know what is going on, if we are allowed to do that.
During the pandemic, the IAEA has had to develop new mechanisms for sharing nuclear safety information.
Yeah.
What has been the impact of those new mechanisms?
Well, good and bad, as everything in pandemic. I would say the good thing is that it increased the intensity and the frequency of our contacts with our partners who understood that we had to work in this way. We've been producing a number of reports so that the world may have an idea of how resilient the nuclear safety security system was during the pandemic. So in that sense, it was good. Of course, the interruption of physical presence is always a source of some concern. But now we are catching up, I think, fast.
Safeguards and safety have remained the primary focus of the IAEA historically, primarily because of proliferation issues and nuclear accidents, respectively. The Nuclear Security Summit brought back the focus, I think the global focus, thanks to President Obama, on nuclear security, and that and the fact that it continues to remain a state responsibility. The CPPNM amendment coming into force, do you see nuclear security gaining more focus and the IAEA demanding more responsibility and transparency from states, especially in the view of growing incidents of uranium theft and seizure?
Well, I would say if we characterize this as nuclear security gaining more focus, I think we've thanks to what you described, we've achieved that. The challenge now is to do the job, to once that we have these increased levels of attention at high level, where we have made, I think, good progress in terms of having national authorities that are more responsive and responsible on nuclear security. The important thing is that we can work and make concrete in the actual work in country all these, I would say, process-oriented achievements that we've had. Now we have to bring them, down to the state level and see them realized. We are doing this country by country, region by region, with different degrees of progress, I would say. In some cases, we are going fast. In some others, we have to recognize that countries, especially in pandemic, have many priorities, and sometimes it is difficult for us to convince them to dedicate resources and to work on this one. And yes, events happen. I don't see a marked upward curve on events that could be indicative of a concerning trend. Nuclear security, like nuclear safety, is a constant thing. You can never throw the towel. You can never relax, which doesn't mean that you have to be hysterically running around.
And with this question, you're now coming up on 2 years into the role, Director General. It's a heavy mission. What gives you hope? What gives you inspiration? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, what takes me out of bed every morning is knowing that there's so much to do. there's so much to do. You know, this visit to Washington is an example of that. I would need 26-hour days to do all I need to do. And what is it? This is only a reflection. It's not because people like me. It's because there's so much activity ongoing. I think it's a unique moment. It's a moment where we are confronted with this incredible thing that I suppose may apply to our life as humans, where we are confronted with enormous opportunities and big problems at the same time. So I like to say the IAEA doesn't stop for a single minute. And this is what we try to do.
So with that, sir, I thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
To join us
a real
here
pleasure.
today. You've been so generous with your time, and we're deeply grateful, not just for being here, but for your public service as well. You have a standing invitation here at Stimson to join us at.
I really enjoyed talking to you and seeing so many friends. And yes, indeed, I'll be back.
Excellent. And to our online audience, let me just say as well, thank you all for being part of this event. We're deeply grateful to you for having tuned in. You can continue this conversation on Twitter. We are at the Stimson Center. You can also visit us at stimson.org. I know a site that you spent a lot of time on yourself, Director General. You can be like the Director General as well and join us in conversation at stimson.org.